Imagine the most powerful man on earth, a king who ruled empires, who destroyed nations with a gesture, who built a city so glorious it seemed to touch the heavens, a king whose word was law. But now he is on the ground, crawling, eating grass, soaked in dew, forgotten. Not because of a war defeat, not due to a conspiracy, but because of a voice that came down from heaven and turned him into an animal. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar, the king who thought he was a god, until God showed him who the true king was. But what could have made the Creator break the greatest empire in the world because of one man? What sin was so severe? It deserved 7 years of public humiliation. What did Nebuchadnezzar see during his time of madness? What did he feel when he lost everything? The crown, the name, his sanity. And how did a beast-like king return to the throne with a transformed heart? You are about to uncover the hidden truth behind the Bible's most mysterious judgment, a história oculta de Nabucodonosor. Por que Deus transformou rei em animal? Watch until the end, because this story doesn't end in shame, but in glory. Not with the exaltation of man, but with the exaltation of God. Join us as we explore how Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king on earth, was broken by the hand of God and became a symbol of repentance, restoration, and reverence before the Most High. In the scorching vastness of Mesopotamia, among winds that carried dust across the fertile fields of the Euphrates, a city rose from ruins. Babylon, once subdued by the mighty Assyrians, was now rising under its own strength. And it was in this setting of reconstruction, where every stone carried the weight of an empire's hope, that the heir to an ambitious dream was born. Nebuchadnezzar, son of King Nabopolassar. The people rejoiced, the clay-packed streets filled with songs and drums. There was pride in the eyes of the elders, who saw in that child the continuation of the freedom won by his father. Nabopolassar was not just a warrior, he was the liberator of Babylon, the one who had broken Assyria's yoke and ushered in a new era. And his son, even in his earliest days, already breathed the weight of that legacy. Growing up in the shadow of a conquering father is no simple task. From an early age, Nebuchadnezzar was surrounded by symbols of greatness. He heard tales of battles and improbable victories at the foot of the throne or in campaign tents. While other children played with sticks, he was learning to read maps, listen to generals, and study the skies like the Chaldeans. Nebuchadnezzar was intelligent. More than that, he was observant. His silence during war meetings wasn't apathy, it was strategy. While others spoke, he absorbed. And when he did speak, he surprised. His mind was sharp, his perceptions swift. He spotted flaws in plans before soldiers set foot on the field. He knew with unsettling precision how to sway men, whether by words or by force. But there was something deeper in his gaze, something that grew with him, a restlessness that led him to walk among the city's laborers, listen to architects, and inspect the edges of the wall. His spirit was never content. Babylon was being reborn, but he wanted more. Rebuilding it wasn't enough. He wanted to glorify it, not just to be king. He wanted to be eternal. Meanwhile, Nabopolassar was aging. The scars of past wars weighed heavier than the gold rings on his fingers. Though he saw in his son the brilliance of a glorious future, he also recognized the burden of pride. He tried to shape him, counsel him, but the young prince grew like a river in flood, impossible to contain. He was respectful, yes, loyal without question, but within him was the conviction that he would surpass his father. In time, Nabucodonosor began accompanying the king on expeditions. He saw the empire's borders, the blood-soaked fields of battle. In each conquered village, he learned what drove men to fight, and more importantly, what made them obey. He discovered that fear was effective, but fascination was even more powerful. If he could be admired, he would not need to be feared. This belief grew as he began leading small battalions. When Nabopolassar withdrew, the prince advanced. When the king hesitated, the son acted, and the people noticed. Soldiers whispered his name with reverence. Elders spoke of his fearless spirit. Foreign ambassadors requested audiences with him even before his coronation. But every rise casts a shadow. Nabucodonosor's heart began to fill with dangerous certainties. He came to believe he was chosen by destiny, that no man or God could halt his march. He no longer saw himself as a mere heir. He saw himself as the architect of a new world. He began to confuse leadership with dominion and greatness with divinity. One night, as he walked through the unfinished gardens of the palace, he paused before a dry fountain. Only the wind rustling newly planted palms broke the silence. His reflection in the still water looked older than he was. He touched the surface with his fingertips and whispered, "This world is too small for me." The next morning, a delegation brought news of rebellious lands to the north. Nabopolassar hesitated. He was tired. He looked at his son. "Are you ready?" he asked. Nabucodonosor said nothing. He simply stepped forward. And in that moment, everyone understood. The time had come. With his father on the brink of death, the prince took command of the armies and marched forward with resolve. His name preceded him. Enemies retreated before the battle began, and when victory came, it was overwhelming. Upon his return to Babylon, he was received as a king, even before being crowned. The city hailed him. The throne awaited him. And he sat on it as if he had always belonged. There, seated upon cushions of purple and gold, surrounded by sculpted columns and silent servants, Nabucodonosor finally saw himself as he had long imagined, the absolute sovereign. And within him, something ignited. It wasn't just joy or pride. It was the feeling that everything, heavens, earth, people, and gods, existed to serve him. But the throne that awaited him held more than honor. It held a sentence. The news arrived like a muffled whisper beneath the wailing winds of Mesopotamia. Nabopolassar was dead. The liberator king, the man who had defeated the Assyrians, had passed without seeing his work completed. His eyes closed before witnessing Babylon as the center of a glorious empire. And now the entire hope of the nation rested on the shoulders of his son. Nabucodonosor did not weep, at least not in front of others. His expression remained firm, his steps calculated. Instead of mourning, he carried determination. He knew the inherited throne was not just a symbol, it was a testing ground, and he had no intention of failing. While the priests chanted farewell hymns in the temple of Marduk, Nabucodonosor was already gathering his generals and drawing up strategies. The coronation was magnificent, the city dressed in color. Red carpets covered the palace steps. Trumpets sounded and acclamations echoed through stone corridors. Priests anointed his head with fragrant oil and placed upon it the gleaming crown that had once belonged to his father. The people hailed him, but even as Nabucodonosor smiled, his eyes were already looking beyond the celebration. To him, this was only the beginning. While the eyes of the city sparkled with festivity, the eyes of other kingdoms burned with unease. The rise of a new king was seen as a moment of temporary weakness. In the north, the remnants of the Assyrian army still resisted, now allied with Egypt. They moved like serpents in the shadows, ready to test Babylon's new ruler. Nebuchadnezzar did not hesitate, still wearing the scent of royal anointing on his skin. He summoned his armies. War chariots were aligned, horses saddled, weapons sharpened. It was the first great trial of his reign, and he would turn it into a declaration. Generals questioned if it was too soon. He answered with a look that spoke louder than words. Opportunity does not wait. The city of Carchemish, on the banks of the Euphrates River, had become a strategic point. Whoever controlled Carchemish controlled trade, access routes, and military paths. Nebuchadnezzar knew this. He marched with confidence. His soldiers, though, weary from recent mourning, followed with fervor. There was something about the new king's presence that ignited hearts. He did not lead from afar. He walked among his men, clad in armor, sword at his side, eyes always watching. When they arrived, the atmosphere was tense. On the other side stood the Egyptians, led by an experienced pharaoh. Alongside him, Assyrians thirsty for vengeance. It was a clash of giants. The clash of swords was preceded by days of silence, where spies ran through shadows, war drums echoed in the distance, and the skies themselves seemed to hold their breath. On the day of battle, Nebuchadnezzar mounted his black horse and raised his hand. His soldiers formed into lines. The sound of shields locking together thundered like storm clouds over the earth. When he gave the signal, hell broke loose. Spears soared through the sky. War cries tore through the air. And there, in the middle of that storm of men and steel, the young king proved himself not just a leader, but a legend. He did not hide behind the camp walls. He fought with bloodied arms. He shielded his men. He struck down foes with his own battle cry. And by the day's end, as the dust began to settle, the battlefield revealed a scene that would go down in history. The Egyptians and Assyrians retreating, defeated by a newly crowned king. The victory was overwhelming. Carchemish now belonged to Babylon. Trade routes were sealed under the authority of the new sovereign, and the name Nebuchadnezzar echoed through deserts, mountains, and rivers like unending thunder. He returned home with gold, prisoners, and glory, but above all, he returned with a new title, the king who destroyed two empires in one battle. In Babylon, he was received with more than celebration. He was worshipped. Women sang his name. Men recounted his deeds like eternal legends. Scribes etched the story onto tablets, and artists carved his image into temple walls. Yet Nebuchadnezzar remained undistracted. His gaze was fixed on the future. He wanted more, always more. He began to dream of a Babylon that would not merely exist, but rule, that would not simply win wars, but shape culture, religion, and the world's order. His heart, inflamed by victory, began to believe that nothing was impossible. If he had conquered Egyptians and Assyrians, who else could challenge him? In his war chamber, he drew up expansion plans. He spoke of taller walls, hanging gardens, temples that reached the heavens. Everything he touched should shine. Everything he commanded should be done. He was king. He was power. And little by little, he began to see himself as more than that. On the palace balcony, beneath a starlit sky, He gazed over the city he was building. My father freed this land, but I will turn it into the center of the world. His advisors applauded. His generals feared him, but the sky remained silent, because the true battle would not be against kings, it would be against his own heart. The sun of Babylon rose between the towers, painting the city walls in golden hues. It was a living, pulsing city that breathed greatness and power. Along its wide streets echoed the hurried footsteps of merchants, craftsmen, scribes, and soldiers. Every corner had a story. Every stone held a memory, and at the center of it all, a man was raising not just buildings, but an empire. Nabucodonosor was no longer satisfied with military conquests. His heart longed for something even grander. Defeating kings wasn't enough. He wanted eternity. He wanted future generations, centuries after his death, to gaze upon Babylon and whisper his name with awe and reverence. If he could, he would carve his face into the clouds. With that ambition, he ordered the complete reconstruction of the city, not just to protect it, but to glorify it. Babylon would no longer be just another city. It would become the heart of the world. The projects began with the expansion of the walls. Kiln-fired bricks adorned with inscriptions and images of lions, bulls, and dragons rose both as protection and as proclamations of power. With each new construction, his ambition grew. The Temple of Marduk, the most exalted god of the Babylonians, was restored and expanded. Massive columns stretched skyward like divine arms. The main altar gleamed with gold and rare stones from conquered lands. Nebuchadnezzar oversaw every detail. He chose the colors, the designs, the proportions. Nothing escaped his exacting eye. But the most astonishing project was born in secret, deep in his heart. A hanging garden, raised high to defy the desert. His wife, Amitis, longed for the green mountains of her homeland, and the king, driven by love and vanity alike, promised to recreate the impossible. Thus were born the Hanging Gardens, a marvel the world would come to know with admiration and awe. Terraced levels were built with advanced engineering. A hidden system carried water from the river to the top. Lush trees, vines, exotic flowers, refreshing shadows, and fountains that sang in the wind became part of the scenery. It was said that walking through those gardens felt like walking in a paradise suspended in the air. Foreign nobles, ambassadors, and travelers left Babylon speechless. Never had they seen anything so beautiful, so daring, so divine. The name Nebuchadnezzar began crossing borders, oceans, and deserts. Men came from far away to see him, hear his words, and behold his works. Babylon became the supreme symbol of civilization and dominion. The Tower of Etemenanki, later known as the Tower of Babel, was raised with steps that seemed to touch the stars. It was as if he were declaring, "Not even the sky is beyond my reach." But along with the wonders he raised, something else was rising silently within him: pride. Little by little, Nabucodonosor stopped seeing himself as a servant of the gods and began imagining himself as one. He no longer simply commanded soldiers, he commanded destinies. He no longer merely built walls, he reshaped the world. In his words, there was no more we, only I. At a private banquet, surrounded by advisors and artists, he raised his goblet and declared, "Look around you. This is Babylon, the great city that I have built with my power and for the glory of my name. Faces smiled, hands applauded. But the eyes of heaven did not smile. For in that instant, an invisible crack began to form. The voice of man rose, and the divine response waited patiently. Even Daniel, the exiled prophet among the royal advisors, watched in sorrow. He knew the scriptures. He knew what happened to kings who exalted themselves above God. But it was not yet time to speak, not yet time to intervene. The Most High never rushes, but he never fails. Nabucodonosor began walking the streets in disguise, just to hear the people speak of him. He smiled when he heard children singing his name or elders whispering, "There has never been a king like this one." At night, he looked up at the stars and wondered, if there are gods, why don't they challenge me? He was a man, innocent, but every flight that soars too high eventually finds the ground, and the higher one climbs in pride, the more painful the fall in humiliation. Nabucodonosor was shaping his empire with human hands, not realizing that God was shaping his fate with eternal purposes. Before continuing, we ask for your support. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video to help us keep sharing impactful stories from the Bible. Now let's continue with the astonishing journey of Nabucodonosor. The wind blew drier than usual as the armies of Nabucodonosor approached the gates of Jerusalem. The sky seemed covered in dust, as if creation itself did not wish to witness what was about to happen. The holy city trembled. This was not just another conquest on the map. It was the capital of the people chosen by God. But to Nabucodonosor, it was just another piece in his grand chessboard of glory. The king of Judah, Jehoiakim, had rebelled, breaking the covenant of submission to Babylon. The response came swiftly and without mercy. Nabucodonosor would not tolerate defiance, not when he had just proven his dominance over entire nations. To him, Judah was a stubborn and backward nation, bound to an invisible God and ancient promises. But as he laid siege to Jerusalem, Nabucodonosor did not know he was treading on sacred ground. The siege lasted for weeks. The inhabitants of Jerusalem, trapped, watched their supplies dwindle. The cisterns ran dry. Children cried from hunger. The people, who once cried out in faith, now screamed in desperation. The walls still stood, but the hearts inside had already surrendered. When the gates finally opened, there was no honor, only surrender. Nabucodonosor entered on horseback, flanked by his generals. His eyes scanned the city like a lion walking over its prey. Solomon's temple, still gleaming with its sacred ornaments, caught his attention. It was beautiful, even to a foreign king. But he did not bow. On the contrary, he ordered that the sacred vessels be removed and taken to his palace. In Babylon, it wasn't just conquest, it was humiliation. A message to all of Judah: your God did not save you. But Nabucodonosor didn't understand. God had not been defeated. He had simply allowed it. The judgment upon Judah had been long foretold. The prophets had warned them. Now it was being fulfilled. Among the king's many orders, one was particularly strategic. Bring me the young men of royal blood, the healthiest, the wisest, the noblest in appearance. I will mold them in the image of Babylon. It was more than slavery, it was assimilation. Nabucodonosor knew that if he could dominate the best of the next generation, he would weaken the future of that nation. That is how Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were taken. Young men from the people of God, selected for their faith, intelligence, and strength. Among the silent march of captives, their eyes did not drop. There was pain, yes, but also conviction. They knew they carried more than their own fate. They carried the name of the Most High God. Upon arriving in Babylon, they were brought to the royal palace, a place of polished marble, majestic columns, and wide windows that opened to the starry skies of Mesopotamia. There, they were placed under the supervision of Ashpenaz, chief of the eunuchs. They would eat from the king's table, wear fine clothing, and above all, receive new identities. Nabucodonosor wanted more than well-treated slaves. He wanted to erase their past, to forget the God of Israel. So he ordered their names to be changed. Daniel became Belteshazzar, Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, Azariah became Abednego. It was as if their faith was being stripped away, name by name, but names can change, appearances can be molded. Yet a faithful spirit endures, and these young men refused to be corrupted. In secret, they still prayed. In silence, they fasted. Their bodies were in Babylon, but their hearts remained with God. Daniel in particular stood out. His wisdom was deep, but his humility was greater. He observed everything carefully and spoke little. But when he spoke, everyone listened. Nabucodonosor did not yet know who he was, but heaven did. Days passed, and the young men learned the language and culture of the Chaldeans. They were trained to serve before the king, but even among strange customs and false gods, Daniel and his friends preserved something sacred, the conviction that God was still in control, even in exile. Meanwhile, Nabucodonosor viewed those young men as trophies of his victory. To him, they had been conquered, tamed, subdued. But he had no idea that among those captives were voices that would soon confront his arrogance, voices that would bring messages from heaven, that would survive fire, that would reveal the future. Jerusalem, which he believed defeated, had planted within his court the seeds of divine judgment. Daniel's eyes shone, not with fear but with faith. The words he had yet to speak would one day echo through the palace halls with more force than any army. Nabucodonosor was shaping Babylon with human hands, but God was already shaping the spiritual stage with eternal purposes. They came as prisoners, but they would become the voice of the Most High in a pagan land. The scent of spices filled the palace corridors. Golden dishes carried succulent meats, fragrant cakes, and pure wine brought from distant lands. The tables were not set merely for dining, but as parades of opulence, eating from the king's table was more than a privilege. It was a symbol of alliance, a sign of submission to the empire. And among the guests at that imperial banquet were the young captives from Judah. They had been carefully selected, prepared by Ashpenaz, the chief official. Their role was simple: to become useful to the king, absorb Babylonian culture, and serve with excellence. That included speaking the Chaldean language, wearing their garments, learning their wisdom, and eating as they did. But something unexpected happened. Daniel, still young, yet with a spirit firm as the rock of Zion, looked at the delicacies laid before him and refused. It wasn't merely a matter of taste. It was a matter of faith. The food and wine had been offered to Babylonian idols. To eat from the royal table was, for them, to participate in false worship and deny the God of Israel. Daniel was not alone. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, now called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shared the same conviction. They could accept new names, They could learn a new language, but they would not give up what tied them to the God who had never abandoned them, even in exile. With humility and courage, Daniel approached Ashpenaz and made a direct request. "Please, do not force us to defile ourselves with the king's food. Give us only vegetables and water for 10 days. Then compare our appearance with that of the other young men." Ashpenaz hesitated. He liked Daniel, but feared for his own head. If the boys appeared weak or sickly, the king would hold him responsible, and Nabucodonosor was not known for his patience. But Daniel persisted, and God granted him favor before that man. And so, quietly, without spectacle, the test began. While others ate from the king's table, Daniel and his friends sat apart. Their meals were simple, humble, but pure. They prayed before each meal, and though they were few, they ate with dignity and faith. The days dragged on. In the palace, eyes watched, soldiers whispered, other young men mocked them with disdain. How could these boys expect to thrive on just grains and greens? It was not only a challenge to logic, it was a challenge to the king himself. On the 10th day, the results stunned everyone. Daniel and his friends looked healthier, stronger, and more radiant than all the others. Their faces glowed with life. Their posture was firm, their eyes alert. Ashpenaz, astonished, allowed them to continue their diet. What began as a small act of resistance had become a silent victory, but the transformation was not just physical. God, seeing the faithfulness of these young men, poured out wisdom upon them. Daniel, in particular, received something even rarer, the gift of understanding visions and dreams, something no Babylonian training could provide. At the end of their 3 years of preparation, the young men were brought before the king. Nabucodonosor personally evaluated them. One by one, they answered the monarch's questions with precision, intelligence, and humility. And to everyone's surprise, no Chaldean youth matched Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king was impressed. There they were, 4 foreigners, captives, who surpassed the finest of his own people. They did not just speak with wisdom, they carried an authority that transcended the palace walls. Nabucodonosor didn't yet understand, but he was standing before messengers of a God he did not know. The young men were placed among the wise, men of the court. Their names began to circulate through the halls and councils. But unlike others, they did not use their positions for personal gain. They continued to pray, fast, and live with integrity. They knew that the true king did not dwell in golden temples, but in the highest heavens. And Nabucodonosor, though he wouldn't admit it, began to notice. They were not just intelligent, there was something different about them, something no master, priest, or magician in Babylon could replicate. A light that did not come from the stars, but from something far greater. Thus, in the heart of the greatest city in the world, surrounded by statues of pagan gods, they remained faithful. In a palace where all bowed to human power, 4 young men bowed only to the God of Israel. And for the first time, the king did not have the last word, and that disturbed him. Night fell like a cloak over Babylon. But within the royal chamber, the darkness had another name: torment. Nabucodonosor tossed and turned between linen pillows and silk curtains. His eyes were wide open, his chest restless. The King of Kings, who commanded armies and decreed destinies, was now a prisoner of something he could not control, a dream. But it was no ordinary dream. It was heavy, vivid, a vision that invaded his mind like a silent storm. When he awoke, his body was drenched in cold sweat, his heart raced, his mouth was dry. He tried to recall the details, but the more he strained, the more the dream slipped through his fingers like smoke. And yet what remained was fear. "Guards!" he cried, his voice firm but trembling. "Bring the wise men, now!" Within minutes, hurried footsteps filled the corridors. The throne room, still in the early hours before dawn, was hastily illuminated. Astrologers, Chaldeans, enchanters, magicians, and interpreters arrived in ceremonial robes, still drowsy but alert. To the king's tone, Nebuchadnezzar sat on his throne, elbows on his knees, head bowed forward. His gaze pierced through them like a blade. "I had a dream that troubles my soul. I want to know what it means." The magicians glanced at one another, puzzled, until one stepped forward with reverence. "O king, live forever. Tell us the dream, and we will give the interpretation." The king's face hardened. "No, you will tell me the dream and its interpretation. Then I will know you are not deceiving me with empty words." A murmur spread like muffled thunder through the room. A second sage, older, tried to reason. "Majesty, no king has ever demanded such a thing. Tell us the dream, and with all our knowledge we will explain it." But the king's patience, already fraying, turned into threat. "If you do not tell me the dream, you will all be executed. Your homes turn to ruins. But if you tell me the dream and its meaning, you will receive honor, gifts, and power." A heavy silence fell. Fear grew like thick smoke. A young magician, sweating at the brow, dared to whisper, "O king, no one on earth can do what you ask." "Enough!" Nebuchadnezzar roared, slamming his fist on the throne. "You are frauds, flatterers. If you are truly wise, prove it. I need no sweet words, I need truth." The royal guard was summoned. The king's decree echoed through corridors and streets. All the wise men of Babylon were to be executed. The order was clear, swift, and without appeal. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Daniel was still asleep in his chamber. He had no idea that a death sentence now hung over his head. A royal officer, Arioch, rushed in, sword at his side, face tense. "Daniel, get up. The king has ordered the execution of all wise men." "We must go." Daniel rose silently, taking a deep breath. There was no panic in his face, only gravity. He looked at Arioch and asked calmly, "Why is the king's decree so harsh?" "Because he had a dream, and he demands that someone tell it to him, without him revealing it first. None of the wise men could do it. Now they must all die." Daniel paused in thought. Then, with a serenity that clashed with the urgency of the moment, he replied, "Take me to the king. I ask only for time, and I will tell him the dream and its interpretation." Arioch hesitated. It was a dangerous boldness. But something in Daniel's voice convinced him. Within minutes, the prophet stood before the throne. The king's eyes stared at him with impatience and perhaps also suspicion. "Are you able?" Nebuchadnezzar asked, voice low and tense. Daniel bowed his head respectfully. "Majesty, no man on earth can reveal what you seek, no magician, enchanter, or astrologer, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Grant me a little time, and he will show what you saw as you slept." The king did not reply immediately. He simply nodded. The execution was postponed, but the expectation had grown even greater. Daniel left the palace and returned home, where he gathered his friends. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego approached quickly, reading the seriousness in his face. "What happened?" Meshach asked. "Death stands at our door," Daniel answered. "But God is greater." They prayed. They cried out with fervor. Their voices, though low, rose like incense to heaven. They pleaded for mercy, wisdom, revelation. There was no time for human plans. It was a matter of faith. That very night the God of Israel answered. While Daniel slept, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar was revealed to him. Every detail, every symbol, every shadow. Daniel awoke with tears in his eyes and trembling in his heart. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to him. He changes times and seasons. He reveals deep and hidden things. And now, he has revealed to me what we asked. At dawn, Daniel appeared again before Arioch. Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will tell him what he saw. Arioch rushed. The palace gates opened. The crowd murmured, fearing the worst. But there stood Daniel, the captive, the Hebrew youth, carrying a revelation no man had been able to obtain, and the silence of men was about to be shattered by the wisdom of heaven. The throne of Nebuchadnezzar was surrounded by uncertainty. The king, tormented by sleepless nights and days of bottled-up rage, awaited something he would never admit, an answer he could not produce himself. The palace hall was silent. Guards stood still. Magicians and priests, humiliated, avoided all eye contact. Then Daniel entered. With serene eyes and steady steps, he approached the king like one who already knew the weight of the words he carried. Nebuchadnezzar observed him intently. He was just a foreign youth, but in that moment, he was the only one among thousands who claimed to have heard from heaven. Are you able to reveal the dream and its interpretation? The king asked, his voice restrained but heavy with expectation. Daniel lifted his eyes, unwavering, and replied, The mystery the king demands cannot be revealed by wise men, nor magicians, nor enchanters. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has chosen to show King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the last days. The room held its breath. As you lay on your bed, O king, thoughts came to you about what is to come. And the Lord has revealed it to you. Here is what you saw. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment and, opening them, began to describe the dream with astonishing precision. You saw a great statue, a colossal figure, dazzling and terrifying, standing before you. The head was of pure gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Nebuchadnezzar, hearing these words, leaned back slightly on his throne. The details he thought forgotten returned as if being drawn anew before his eyes. You watched, Daniel continued, until a stone was cut out, but not by human hands. And it struck the statue on the feet of iron and clay. The feet shattered. The entire statue collapsed, crushed. Then the gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay were blown away like chaff in the wind, and the stone became a great mountain and filled the entire earth. A deep silence overtook the room. Nebuchadnezzar leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Daniel. Now, said the prophet, listen to the interpretation. You, O king, are the head of gold. The God of heaven has given you the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. Into your hands he has placed mankind, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the sky. You are the king of kings, but after you another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Then a third kingdom of bronze will rule over the earth, and then a fourth, strong as iron, will crush and break all the others. Daniel's voice remained steady without fear. He spoke as one who did not ask permission to tell the truth. As for the feet of iron and clay, this will be a divided kingdom, part strong, part brittle, mixed but lacking unity. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. The stone cut without human hands will crush all human kingdoms, and this kingdom will endure forever. Nabucodonosor sat motionless. His throne no longer felt so secure. The statue in his mind had become more than an image. It had become judgment. Daniel, the young captive, had not only revealed the dream, he had put the king in his place. He was gold, yes, but gold that would come to an end. The counselors exchanged glances. Some expected an outburst of fury, others an order for arrest. But something unexpected happened. Nabucodonosor stood up, and in front of everyone he bowed low before Daniel. "Truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings," he declared, his voice trembling. For no one could reveal this mystery except him. He ordered that gifts be given to Daniel: fine clothing, gold, authority. He appointed him governor over the entire province of Babylon, and at Daniel's request, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were placed as administrators under him. It was a moment that could have changed everything. But Nabucodonosor, though he acknowledged the power of Daniel's God, did not renounce his own pride. He admired the gift, but did not submit to the giver. He praised with words, but not with his heart. Later, in a private conversation with his counselors, the king said, "I am the head of gold, the greatest of all kingdoms, chosen among men." One bold advisor asked, "And the stone, Majesty? The one that destroyed everything?" The king smiled, but his eyes narrowed. Dreams are merely visions, and visions are often shaped by fear. Babylon is real. I am real. The revelation that was meant to humble only inflated his pride even more. Time passed, but the image did not leave the king's mind. The statue from the dream, the head of gold, the chest of silver, the belly of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay continued to haunt him. But now, Nabucodonosor saw it differently, not as a prophecy, but as a blueprint. In his mind, the dream was not a divine warning, but inspiration to eternalize his own greatness. "If I am the head of gold," he said one morning to his craftsman, "then let the world see gold in full. I want a statue, not just the head, the entire thing, all of it gold, raise it high, let no one ignore it." The architects exchanged glances. The order was bold. A colossal image, nearly 30 meters tall and 3 meters wide, was to be erected in an open plain in Dura before all nations. The message was clear. Nabucodonosor would not accept being merely part of a fleeting empire. He wanted to be eternal, and with his own hands, he began to challenge what God himself had revealed. The work took months. Foundries ran without rest. Roads were cleared to transport tons of metal. The dust from construction filled the air like smoke. The gold gleamed beneath the desert's scorching sun. It was an impressive sight. A golden monster, silent and cold, yet full of meaning. When it was finished, the statue was positioned like a beacon on the plain. From far away, it could be seen shining. The king ascended a high platform and looked around. Generals, governors, judges, sages, and officials from every conquered nation stood assembled. Drums pounded. The crowd bowed in reverence. but something was still missing. "Bring the musicians," he ordered. Flutists, harpists, tambourine players, bagpipes, every kind of sound, and proclaim this decree. A herald stepped forward and cried aloud, "Peoples, nations, and languages, when you hear the sound of the instruments, fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nabucodonosor has set up. Whoever does not bow will be immediately thrown into the blazing furnace." Silence fell like a sentence. The decree was sealed. Worship of the king's ego had now become law. This was not just a symbolic gesture, it was a demand for total submission. Any refusal would mean flames. Nabucodonosor watched from his platform. The musicians tuned their instruments. Governors whispered among themselves. Some seemed hesitant, but all knew they had no choice. The king, who had once acknowledged the God of heaven, now demanded that all acknowledge him as the supreme image. One of the Chaldean chiefs approached the king discreetly. "Majesty, what about the Hebrews, those young men in your court?" "They will bow as well," Nabucodonosor replied without looking. "In this land there is no name above mine." The sound began. The first notes echoed across the plain. One by one, the men began to bow, some quickly, others reluctantly. The ground became covered in knees and foreheads. Those still standing looked around, pressured by the crowd, cornered by the gaze of soldiers. But there, in the middle of the golden field, bathed in sunlight and surrounded by gold, 3 figures remained standing, 3 young men, 3 Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They did not hesitate. They did not pretend. They did not disguise themselves. Their eyes were fixed on the sky. Their feet were planted firmly on the ground. There would be no compromise. They knew only one God, and he did not bow to statues. People around them began to murmur. Guards grew tense. Advisors whispered to each other. "Majesty, there are 3 men who have defied your decree," the Chaldeans said. "They refused to bow." "Who are they?" the king asked, his brows furrowed. "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, from the exile of Judah." The face of Nabucodonosor darkened. His rage rose like fire. "Bring them here, now!" The crowd watched in suspense. The statue gleamed. The heat was intense. And the 3 young men walked forward, steady, eyes unwavering, unafraid. They knew their bodies might be thrown into fire, but their souls would never bend. Those who refused would face the flames. The throne hall shook under the weight of royal wrath. Nabucodonosor, once cloaked in gold and glory, now stood face to face with something even his armies could not bend. The conviction of 3 young captives, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were brought before the king, but they came without chains, without fear in their faces, without turning their gaze. "Is it true," roared the king, rising from his throne, "is it true that you refused to bow before the image I commanded to be raised?" The silence was tense, but not empty. "Did you not hear the decree? When the music plays, all must bow, all. But if you do not, you will be thrown at once into the blazing furnace. And what God will be able to deliver you from my hand?" Shadrach stepped forward. His voice was gentle, but firm as stone. "O king, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us, and he will deliver us from your hand." Abednego, standing beside him, added, "But even if he does not, know this, O king, we will not serve your gods, nor Will we worship the golden image you have set up?" The words fell like arrows upon the throne. Nabuchodonosor stood motionless for a moment, as if digesting the audacity. Then his face twisted. The veins bulged in his neck. His eyes burned like coals. "Heat the fire 7 times hotter." Guards ran. The furnace, already roaring with deadly heat, now crackled like a raging beast. The heat was so intense that the soldiers who approached with the prisoners began to stagger, overcome by the smoke. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were bound with new ropes. Their turbans, robes, and cloaks still on them, they were led to the edge of the furnace, without struggle, without resistance. As the soldiers threw them in, the flames consumed the warriors themselves, killing them instantly, scorched before they could step away. But the 3 young men fell into the fire and remained alive. On the throne, Nabuchodonosor watched, waiting, to hear screams, the crackling of flesh, the stench of despair. But what he saw was not part of the plan. "How many did we throw in?" he asked, eyes fixed on the flames. "3, O king," a counselor replied hesitantly. "Then why do I see 4 men walking in the fire, unbound, radiant, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods?" The king's eyes widened. His voice, once filled with fury, now trembled. He approached the furnace cautiously, covering his face with a cloth, and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." The 3 young men walked out calmly. Their steps were steady, their clothes untouched, their hair unsinged. The flames that were meant to be a sentence had become a testimony. Governors and officials ran to inspect them. They touched their garments, smelled their cloaks, examined their hands. Nothing had been burned. Nothing. Not a single mark. The silence was broken by the voice of Nabuchodonosor. "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants. They trusted him and defied my command, choosing to give their lives rather than serve or worship any god but their own." Then the king made a new decree. "Anyone who speaks against their god shall be torn limb from limb, and their house turned to rubble, for there is no other god who can save in this way." Daniel, from a distance, watched in silence. The miracle had been clear, undeniable. The king himself had acknowledged the power of the God of Israel. But the prophet knew, a public declaration is not the same as a surrendered heart. Nabuchodonosor promoted the 3 young men to even higher positions. Their names spread across the province. But while the people celebrated the miracle, something still lingered in the king's heart. Something unsurrendered. He had seen the impossible. He had witnessed fire become a place of refuge. But between seeing and surrendering lies a great chasm. Nabuchodonosor admired the power of God, but he still believed that his own glory was self-made. His pride still ruled with him. Seeing is not the same as surrendering, and pride still reigned in the king's heart. The sky over Babylon that morning was clear, almost golden. The sun rose above the towering walls, casting soft light upon the hanging gardens. Birds sliced through the air, and below them a living city pulsed with strength and order. The market bustled. The streets echoed with the sounds of wheels, footsteps, and voices from every corner of the empire. Men and women mingled among spices, gemstones, fabrics from afar, and the proud language of the Chaldeans. Nabuchodonosor was at peace. Peace, at least according to himself. The wars had ceased. his enemies were subdued, and the people lived in abundance. More than anything, the city that had once lain in ruins was now the glory of the world, and he was the architect of it all. The king walked slowly along the palace terraces. At his side, his counselor Arbanus kept his customary distance. Servants held jars of wine and fanned the air with fine linen fans. "Look closely, Arbanus," said Nabuchodonosor, smiling, pointing to the horizon. "Tell me, have you ever seen anything so grand in your life?" "Majesty, nothing compares. Babylon is immortal." "Immortal!" The king repeated the word as if savoring it. "Yes, this city is my throne on earth. Every stone you see, every wall, every gate, all passed through my hands." Arbanus nodded in silence, glancing sideways. He knew the king was pleased, but he also saw what others could not, a growing restlessness. "Majesty," he ventured, "I've noticed your mind seems troubled, even with everything in order. Is something bothering you?" The king stopped, stared into the void. "Sometimes. I dreamed of the end," he murmured, "but that has passed. Now, when I look upon all this, I know I am safe. I am secure. Secure as the gold of the statue," Arbanus remarked cautiously. Nabuchodonosor turned to him slowly. "Do not speak of the statue as mere metal, Arbanus. It is a symbol, my symbol." "Yes, of course, Majesty." The king resumed walking. "One night I lay down in peace," he continued, now speaking as if revealing a secret, "and I had another dream, strange, deep. There was a massive tree with a crown that touched the heavens. Its shadow covered the world. Its fruit fed every creature. Animals rested beneath it. Birds nested in its branches." "And what happened to it?" asked Arbanus, unable to hide his curiosity. Nabuchodonosor hesitated, took a deep breath. "A messenger descended from heaven, a watchman. He cried out like thunder, 'Cut down the tree, but leave the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze among the grass. Let the dew soak his body, let his heart be changed to that of a beast, until he acknowledges that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men.'" Arbanus turned pale. "Majesty, that sounds like an omen." "Sounds like it," the king snapped. "Or is it?" He turned abruptly and called out, "Bring the magicians, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. I want answers." Within minutes the throne room filled. The elders bowed. One of them, long-bearded and robed in purple, stepped forward. "Majesty, live forever. Tell us the dream, and we shall try to understand." The king recounted it, word for word. The silence of the wise men only increased the tension. "Well then," demanded Nabuchodonosor, "what does it mean?" The Chaldean looked at his colleagues, hesitated, then stammered, "The dream is complex, O king, deep. Perhaps it is symbolic. Perhaps—" "You know nothing!" roared Nabuchodonosor. "Mouths full of wind!" The counselors lowered their heads. The king paced like a caged beast. "Call Daniel, the captive Belteshazzar, as I named him. He has the spirit of the gods." Arbanus ran out. As they waited, the king approached the window. Once again he looked out upon the city. "They don't understand, Arbanus. They do not comprehend the weight I carry. To be king of Babylon is not merely to rule, it is to hold the earth itself in your hands." "Majesty, perhaps it is exactly that weight the Most High wishes to remove." Nebuchadnezzar turned slowly. "Mind your words, Arbanus." Soon, Daniel entered the room. His robe was simple, his eyes deep. He bowed before the king. "You were summoned because the spirit of the gods is in you," said the king. "No one has been able to give me an answer, but you can. Listen to my dream." Daniel listened in silence. When the king finished, he lowered his gaze, his expression darkened. "Why the sorrowful face, Belteshazzar?" the king asked. "Do you not have confidence?" Daniel lifted his eyes. "O king, if only this dream were for your enemies, and not for you." The king frowned. "Speak." Daniel took a deep breath. "The tree, O king, is you. You have grown great. Your glory reaches the heavens, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. But you will be brought low, driven from among men. You will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like oxen. 7 times will pass over you, until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he wills." The room fell silent. "But there is hope," Daniel continued. "O king, accept my counsel. Break off your sins with righteousness. Relieve the afflicted. Perhaps your prosperity will be prolonged." Nebuchadnezzar said nothing. He simply stared at Daniel, then turned back to the window. From above, Babylon shone so vast, so powerful, so his God's silence was not absence, it was warning, and behind the curtain of heaven, judgment was already being prepared. Time passed like a gentle breeze over the fields of Babylon. The hanging gardens bloomed, the markets bustled. Foreigners arrived in droves to trade, to learn, and to revere the most powerful throne on earth. From the heights of the palace, Nebuchadnezzar looked upon the city with the eyes of one who believed he had conquered even time itself. But in the quietest of nights, the king still heard whispers from heaven, a restlessness that would not go away, a weight that had no clear source. He tried to ignore it, until one night the dream returned. It wasn't the same dream, but it was more intense, more vivid, as if spoken directly to the soul. In the dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw before him a majestic tree. It grew in the center of the earth, tall, towering, with a canopy that reached the heavens. Its branches stretched to the ends of the world. Its fruit was abundant. Wild animals sheltered beneath it. Birds made nests in its branches. Entire nations lived under its protection. It was beauty. It was strength. It was dominion. But then the heavens opened. A thundering voice came down like a sword. A watchman, a holy messenger, appeared among the clouds. His voice was like cutting wind, and his command was unmistakable. "Cut down the tree, chop off its branches, strip its leaves, scatter its fruit. Drive the animals from beneath it and the birds from its branches." The king's heart clenched within the dream. The tree, once immovable, was now marked for destruction, but the command continued. "Yet leave the stump, bound with iron and bronze, among the grass. Let it be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let its portion be with the beasts, among the plants of the field. Let its human heart be removed. Let it be given the heart of an animal. And let 7 times pass over it." The king awoke, gasping, eyes wide, breath heavy. Sweat streamed down his forehead. For a moment, he thought he was still in the dream. "Guards!" he shouted, just as he had once before. "Bring Daniel, immediately!" In the great hall, the king paced back and forth. Advisors whispered in corners. No other wise man was summoned, only Daniel, the only one Nebuchadnezzar trusted when heaven spoke. Daniel entered in silence. He already recognized the burden on the king's face. He bowed and asked, "Were you troubled in spirit, O king?" "Yes," Nebuchadnezzar replied, "and I need an answer. Only you can tell me." "Speak, my lord. Your servant listens." The king took a deep breath and began. "I saw a tree in the middle of the earth, very tall, strong, beautiful, with green leaves and abundant fruit. All creatures took shelter beneath it. Then I heard a holy messenger descend from heaven and cry out for it to be cut down. But the stump was to remain, bound in chains, drenched with dew, given the heart of an animal, living among beasts, and that 7 times would pass over it, until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he pleases." Nebuchadnezzar stopped speaking. Daniel remained silent, eyes downcast. His face seemed burdened by an invisible weight. "Well?" the king asked impatiently. "What does it mean?" Daniel didn't respond immediately. "Belteshazzar?" the king pressed, using the name he had given him. The prophet lifted his eyes slowly. His lips trembled, not with fear, but with compassion. "If only this dream were for your enemies, O king, and not for you." Nebuchadnezzar furrowed his brow. Daniel took a step forward. "The tree you saw is you." The room fell silent. "You have grown. Your dominion reaches the ends of the earth. All live under your shadow. But the time will come when you will be cut down, driven away from people. You will live among wild animals. You will eat grass like oxen. You will be soaked with the dew of heaven, and for 7 times you will live like this, until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over all." Nebuchadnezzar clenched his fists. His face changed, a mix of surprise, wounded pride, and reluctant fear. Daniel, with eyes welling, continued, "However, the stump was left. This means your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, accept my counsel. Do what is right. Free the oppressed. Perhaps the Most High will show mercy and prolong your peace." The king said nothing. Arbanus, standing in a corner of the hall, dared to speak softly. "Majesty, do not ignore this." Nebuchadnezzar did not answer. The tree had been revealed, the axe had been announced, but even in the face of such clarity, his heart still resisted. "Heaven speaks in mysteries, Daniel," the king murmured, looking away. "But not every dream is a decree." Daniel lowered his eyes. He knew he had fulfilled his role. The seed had been sown, but what Nebuchadnezzar would do with it, that was another matter. Because sometimes the warning comes before the fall, and yet it is still ignored. The palace returned to its usual rhythm. The fountains flowed, the scribes wrote, the servants served, but something in the air had changed. A dream unspoken might be forgotten, but a dream interpreted cannot be ignored. The king still felt the weight of Daniel's words echoing in his mind. "You will be cut down. You will live like an animal until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men." But between hearing and obeying, there was a great divide. "Majesty," Arbanus called out one quiet morning. Nebuchadnezzar, eyes still fixed on the city's horizon, replied without turning, "Speak." "Daniel, He didn't just give you a prophecy. He gave you counsel. He told you to break off your injustice, to help the poor. There's still time. Time? The king smiled faintly. If the Most High wishes to tear down a throne, he does not need permission. I have seen fire spare the faithful. I have seen dreams come true. But this prophecy, perhaps it's only a warning, a caution, and a king does not rule by fear. Perhaps, Arbanus replied carefully. A wise king rules precisely because he fears. Nebuchadnezzar turned slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the resolve of a man who had already decided. Daniel is faithful to his God. I respect him, but Babylon was built by my hands. The walls, the temples, the gardens, all bow. And I will not stop reigning simply because I saw a tree fall in a dream. That same afternoon, Daniel was summoned again. The prophet entered in silence. His expression was unchanged, firm and humble. "Daniel," said the king, folding his hands over his knee, "you've always been honest with me. You've spoken what few would dare. That's why today I want to hear you once more." "Listening is easy, O king," Daniel replied. "Obeying what is heard, that is what's hard." "And if I do obey," Nebuchadnezzar countered, "will the prophecy be cancelled?" Daniel drew a deep breath. "It is not for me to say, but the scriptures declare that the Most High is merciful. He sees the heart. If there is repentance, there will be compassion. And what do you expect of me, prophet? Abandon oppression, act with justice, help the poor, acknowledge that the throne you sit on is not yours by merit, but by permission." The king rose and walked to the palace balcony. The city stretched before him like a carpet of glory. The towers gleamed in the sun, the columns shone, Babylon pulsed. "You say none of this is mine?" he murmured. "All that is of earth is temporary," Daniel replied. "And if it's only a dream?" Nebuchadnezzar asked. "Then, thank heaven that you were warned before ruin came." The king said nothing. Then he turned to Daniel. "You are free to go." Daniel bowed and left without another word. The days that followed continued as before. The banquets resumed, decrees were issued, the taxes flowed, and compassion disappeared. An old blind man stretched out his hand on the palace steps. A guard shoved him away. The king passed without looking. On another day, a widow cried out for justice before a judge. The king heard and turned his back. The city grew, the glory shone, but the poor remained forgotten. One night, Arbanus found the king gazing upon the hanging gardens. "Majesty, there's still time." "Arbanus." The king sighed. "Weeks have passed, nothing has changed. The tree still stands, and Babylon flourishes. But what if this is the silence before the storm?" Nebuchadnezzar smiled. Perhaps heaven is simply acknowledging that a king also has the right to his own greatness. And if you're wrong, then let whatever must come, come. But until then, I will reign as I always have." And so the voice of the prophet was forgotten, not because it lacked clarity, but because of too much pride. The tree still stood, but the axe was already laid at the root, because when pride hardens the heart, not even the warning of a prophet can break through. The afternoon heat made the golden towers of Babylon shine like fire. The city was alive. The massive walls seemed to touch the skies. The hanging gardens bloomed like divine works. Men from all nations walked the streets in silk garments, speaking, different tongues, selling spices, precious stones, perfumes, incense. From the balcony of his palace, Nebuchadnezzar watched it all. His arms crossed over his chest, his eyes serene, and his chest inflated with pride. "Majesty," called Arbanus, hesitant, appearing behind him. "The court awaits your presence for the afternoon council." The king did not move. He was still gazing at the city with a calm, almost reverent smile. "Arbanus, do you see this?" he said. "Yes, O king. The city is glorious." "Not just glorious." Nebuchadnezzar breathed deeply. "Perfect. I agree, Majesty." The king stepped forward. He now stood at the center of the balcony, as if seated on a throne before the world. There is no equal, no city rivals Babylon, not Thebes, not Nineveh, not Memphis, not even Jerusalem, with its temple now in ruins. "True, my lord," Arbanus replied quietly. The king raised his hands as if blessing his own creation. "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built by the power of my strength? And for the glory of my majesty?" Arbanus stepped back. It was as if heaven's silence had shattered at that moment. The words floated like sparks in the air, inflamed by pride, heavy with consequence. The king was still smiling, but the wind changed. A sudden breeze swept through the open windows. The plants in their pots rustled. The curtains danced as if sensing something sacred. And then it happened. A voice. It was not human, not thunder, not music. It was a voice that tore through the air, pierced the soul, and silenced all others. "To you it is declared, O Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom has been taken from you." The king froze. Arbanus fell to his knees, covering his head with his hands. "You will be driven from among men," the voice continued. "Your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You will eat grass like oxen. 7 times will pass over you, until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he wills." The balcony trembled. Birds fled from the roof. The city below seemed not to hear. But in the heights, something divine had been decreed. Nebuchadnezzar staggered. His once proud face now looked bewildered. His eyes lost focus. His breath grew heavy. He clutched his chest as if searching for air. And then he looked at Arbanus with a gaze that recognized nothing. "Majesty," called Arbanus, crawling toward him, "are you all right?" Nebuchadnezzar did not respond. He began to walk, but not like a king. His movements were erratic, his steps uneven. He descended the palace's side stairs aimlessly. He passed silently through the corridors. Servants watched him in shock. "What's wrong with the king?" they whispered. He reached the palace gardens, looked at the grass, and knelt. With his hands he began pulling up clumps of grass. Then with his mouth he ate. A general stood by, motionless, unsure whether to weep or flee. "Call Daniel!" shouted Arbanus. "Call the prophet! The judgment has come!" In the sky, clouds slowly gathered. The heat gave way to moisture. Rain began to fall like dew upon the king's skin, now crouched among the plants, licking the earth like an animal. Is he lost?" murmured a servant, wide-eyed. "No," answered Daniel, arriving in silence. "He has only begun to learn." The prophecy had not failed. The word of God was fulfilled at its appointed time. The king who once commanded armies could no longer tell man from beast. He no longer knew his name. He did not recognize the palace. He lived outdoors, his body soaked with dew, His nails grew like claws, his hair like feathers. His mind was overtaken by confusion. Daniel and the faithful prayed for him, but they knew it was necessary. For the throne that does not acknowledge heaven will be brought low to the earth, and the king, who thought himself God, heard the thunder of God. No one dared speak the king's name aloud. The palace was silent, the city murmuring. The generals were lost, the wise men ashamed, and the servants simply confused. The throne of Babylon was empty. Orders no longer came from the royal hall. Now they came in whispers, counselors trying to cover up the scandal. The most powerful man in the world had vanished, not in war nor on a journey, but within his own mind. Nebuchadnezzar wandered the fields outside the very walls he had once ordered built. His crown had fallen, his garments were torn, his posture was bent like a beast, his body was covered in dirt, his face hidden beneath tangled hair. He crawled, he ate whatever he found on the ground, leaves, roots, wet grass. His eyes, once capable of bending kings with a single glance, now drifted toward the clouds, searching for something he couldn't name. "Where is he today?" asked a soldier hesitantly. "Behind the temple," Arbanus replied, his voice choked. "Lying among the bushes." "How many days has it been?" asked the young guard. Arbanus didn't answer. It had been months, then years. Daniel, ever faithful, visited the fields in silence. He brought no gifts, no titles, only compassion. He knelt near the fallen king and prayed quietly, "Most High, you who lift up and bring low, let light rise from darkness." One day, Arbanus joined Daniel and could not hold back a sorrowful question. "Has he truly forgotten who he is?" Daniel answered with a steady but tender voice, "He hasn't forgotten. He's been broken, like a sword bent by fire, now being reforged. But 7 years, 7 times were decreed, not a day less, not one more. Meanwhile, the city reorganized itself. People whispered in the streets, 'What happened to the king?' They say he went mad, a curse from the gods, or from a single god." Some mocked, others feared, but the official silence remained. Nebuchadnezzar's name disappeared from decrees, from gates, from ceremonies, and he continued to crawl. One morning, a child approached the fields with her father. Upon seeing the wild-haired man lying among the stones, she asked, "Daddy, does that man live there?" The father pulled her by the hand, lowered his voice, and replied, "Shh, don't stare. They say he was once a king." The girl's eyes widened. "Him? The king?" The father didn't respond. He simply quickened his pace. Meanwhile, Nebuchadnezzar chewed on a stalk of grass and murmured unintelligible sounds. At times he growled, at times he laughed, at times he wept. Days had no name, nights had no end, and yet heaven watched, and still God waited. In the rain he dragged himself, in the cold he trembled, in the heat he panted like a beast, and still no one touched him. It was as if an invisible hand prevented anyone from harming him or healing him. He was forsaken, but not forgotten. One night, Daniel looked to the heavens and whispered, "How long, Lord?" And heaven remained silent. Another day, Arbanus passed by and saw the king humming, something that resembled a child's lullaby. "There is still something in him," the counselor murmured, "but he can't see it." Daniel replied, "But heaven sees." Year after year, Nebuchadnezzar lost everything that made him a man in the eyes of the world, Power, beauty, dominion, reason, speech, identity. But there was one thing he still possessed, something that even madness could not erase, the ability to look up. And it was in that state, stripped of everything, surrounded by nothing, disfigured, humiliated, that on a grey morning the wind blew gentler. The dew seemed to touch his skin with tenderness, and he, lying among the stones, lifted his eyes for the first time, not in pride, but in search. "What is this?" he murmured, as if speaking to someone unseen. He didn't know it, yet but something had begun to stir within, something like an awakening or an ancient longing, and in the deepest part of madness, a seed of memory began to sprout. The Most High rules over the kingdoms of men, even from the ground. The eyes could still look up to heaven. The sky was clear. For the first time in a long time, Nebuchadnezzar noticed the blue. The wind touched his face, still covered in dust, and there was a different kind of silence around him. It wasn't the silence of madness, it was the silence of someone who for the first time listens. His knees were filthy, his nails like claws, his body covered in matted hair, hardened by dirt and time. But his eyes, those eyes, turned upward, and then it happened. "Most High," he whispered with a broken voice. "Most High." It was just a whisper, a hesitant word, but heaven heard. Suddenly thoughts rushed back like a river bursting through a dam. Memories, names, gestures, decisions, sins, prayers, everything rose to the surface. Nebuchadnezzar fell to his knees, not like a beast, but like a man. I was king. I destroyed Jerusalem. I saw the fire. I saw the righteous. I saw your hand. And even then, I exalted myself. He lifted his hands, trembling, muddy, like a child reaching for embrace. You are God, and I am only dust. Tears streamed down, mingling with the sweat and dew. Right there, in the field where he had eaten grass like oxen, where he had forgotten his own name, Nebuchadnezzar looked to the heavens and recognized, I praise you, I exalt you, for your dominion is eternal, and your kingdom endures from generation to generation. At that very moment, a different peace overtook his body. It wasn't relief, it was restoration. His mind cleared, his eyes regained focus, his hands stopped trembling, and the man who had once crawled now breathed as if he had been born again. Daniel, praying in the distance, lifted his eyes toward the field and whispered, He has returned. Nebuchadnezzar was brought back to the palace. His clothes were changed, his hair was trimmed, his nails cleaned, but none of that mattered as much as what had happened within, before the gathered court. Now, once again seated on the throne, he spoke. Lords, generals, wise men, listen to me. For years I thought I ruled everything, that my empire was the result of my own strength, that my name should be exalted. He paused, looking into the eyes of the men who once flattered him out of fear and who now stood trembling. But I was cast down, cut like a tree, humbled like no other. I lost my reason. I ate like beasts. I wandered like the insane. And why? Why? He rose from the throne. Because there is only one who rules over kings. Only one whose dominion never ends, and he, the God of Daniel, is just. He humbles the proud, but lifts up those who repent. Silence filled the room. Many lowered their eyes, others wept, and Daniel smiled. Now I know, said The king, his voice steady, why God turned a king into a beast. It was not to destroy me, but to break me, to show me that true greatness comes from humility. In that moment, Nebuchadnezzar was no longer just a restored king. He was a redeemed man. To him, I give glory. And if any of you wish to exalt yourselves as I once did, remember, the Most High can make you crawl until you learn to look up. The hall remained in silence, and for the first time in all the empire, the glory of God was proclaimed from the highest throne on earth. For only the one who has fallen to the dust can truly see the throne that is in heaven. The palace columns stood taller, the gates wider, the gardens greener. But something invisible and infinitely more valuable had been restored in Babylon, the king's heart. Nebuchadnezzar no longer walked with his chin raised, but with his eyes lifted toward heaven. The scars of humiliation remained on him, a deeper gaze, slower steps, a voice stripped of arrogance. But he was a whole man. A king, yes, but now a servant of the Most High, seated on his throne, surrounded by the same counselors who once praised him out of fear. He was now listened to with genuine respect, not because of his strength, but because of his testimony. Today I speak to you not as a conqueror, he would say, but as one who has been conquered. He looked at the crowd of officials and elders, his voice firm but without vanity. I lost my glory, my reason, my throne. I lived like an animal. I ate grass from the field. I forgot my name. And why? He paused. Everyone waited. Because I believed the glory was mine. Arbanus, standing beside the throne, lowered his head, eyes filled with tears. Daniel, silent, simply listened. But today, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of Heaven. And at that moment, no wall in Babylon was higher than the humility born in that king's heart. He continued, if anyone wishes to know who the God of Israel is, look at me, not at the power I once held, but at the judgment I faced. Not at the throne to which I returned, but at the mercy that restored me. He stood. The officials rose to their feet. The greatest power a king can possess is to recognize that all power belongs to God. Silence filled the hall. Then Daniel stepped forward. He bowed before the king and said, Majesty, today your crown shines brighter than ever, because it reflects not gold, but reverence. Nebuchadnezzar descended the steps of the throne, walked to the center of the hall, lifted his arms to the heavens, and declared with a voice strong enough for all peoples, tongues, and nations to hear, all his works are true, and his ways are just, and all who walk in pride he is able to humble. And in that moment, the glory of God echoed not just from heaven, but from the mouth of a king who had learned the difference between power and worship. He did not return the same. He did not return as the man who once stepped onto the balcony to exalt himself. He returned transformed, not by decree, not by sword, not by persuasion, but by the hand of the eternal God, who breaks a man to heal him and makes him lose everything, to give him what can never be lost. And thus ends the hidden story of Nebuchadnezzar, why this king was turned into a beast, not with human glory, but with the exaltation of the eternal God. If you enjoyed this story, 2 more videos with equally deep and transformative biblical stories will now appear on your screen. Click to watch, subscribe to the channel, and leave a like. May the Most High God, the same one who humbled and restored a king, be with you.